faxes some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey, welcome to Build the Wall. My name is Chris Spangle. It is so great to be with you. Thank you to all of our patrons. This Build the Wall show is specifically for folks who are donors at the $25 and $100 level. Donors, members, subscribers. I'm not sure what to call you folks anymore, but supporters are really the best descriptor. And I'm doing Build the Wall this month solo, sans other folks, just because I want to talk to you directly and just kind of fill you in. And at the end of every year, I'm always improve. I'm obsessive about getting details right, and I think details really matter. And I've always been really focused on making sure that we're innovating, that we're changing. You know, I don't like big changes that totally freak people out, because I think that tends to spook an audience. And, you know, my experience in radio, which is kind of, you got to manage audiences a little bit. And so, but we made a change this month. We made several changes. You know, we really spent 2 years, I spent 2 years really working on 2020, making sure that we've capitalized on the election, and it paid off. My personal social media, I know that I'm starting to get reach there because people are liking comments by like the dozens. The numbers are way up at We Are Libertarians, and you know, it was a really solid year, and launched Liberty Explained, a project that I'm kind of fell off with a little bit for about a month, just because there comes a point when a man has too much to do, or woman, where you just kind of go, I just can't, I'm at my bandwidth. But I am off work the next 2 weeks, and I'm going to like really dig in on the Liberty Explained stuff and keep working on that site. And, you know, that was probably the biggest change, was adding that show, because we wanted to build a website that's like just super safe and easy for your friends to share libertarianism with. The podcasts haven't been as regular as I'd like, just because it's hard to get our three busy schedules together. But the website is great, and there's tons of cool information there, and more to come. And the second was the new logo change in January or February. I love that logo. I love the We Are Libertarians blue, and the Brendan did a great job with that design. And I almost didn't go through with the name change just to keep that, because I love it so much. And so that's why the We Are Libertarians network will remain. I mean, not just because of 10 years of brand equity, but also I love that logo so much. But the biggest change in a while is something I've been thinking about for about 4 years now. And I still catch myself calling the Chris Spangle Show the We Are Libertarians. It'll probably always be that way. But I felt I needed to make the change for a couple reasons. You know, we've been talking about this. I remember talking about this with Greg in like 2015. Because the type of show we were doing then, which was much more comedy-based, still has the same problems that we have now, which is the show is focused on news analysis. The show is focused on life. You know, like the student loan episode that I posted today is very comfortable. I always put the listener first, right? Everything I do, I've been mentored by many Hall of Fame radio people to be obsessed with the listener and how they interact with your content and how they perceive it. And the disconnect that people had when they expect to download, they want to know more about the libertarian philosophy when they download a show that says We're Libertarians or Liberty Explained. And there's a disconnect that I have constantly seen for 8 years of, well, why are you talking about drug addiction? Or why are you talking about suicide and therapy? Like, why are you talking about all these big life issues when I just want to know, like, what's the libertarian opinion on abortion or the libertarian opinion on borders? And so the name in some ways has always been constraining and grammatically somewhat incorrect. And I just sort of winged it, went with the name. And, about 3 years in, was just like, I don't know that, grammatically this isn't right. Like, I want to change it to something different, but it's a collaboration. The Chris Spangle show is probably the most natural because I've always been the anchor point on it. But I had a lot of reservations because it was always an ensemble show. And, even now, Reinhold and Harry will still be there every Saturday. And, when I started talking about it again, they were totally cool with it. And were like, yeah, it makes the most sense. Like, I've gotten nothing but positive feedback except for one iTunes review. But I just think the type of show we do is going to set the expectations. My personal name has been has increased in the last few years just because of various jobs that I have and other projects. So people are searching for me, and it's somewhat of an easier barrier to entry for those people, for normies, for high school friends, for pat down listeners, to listen to a podcast called The Chris Spangle Show as opposed to We Are Libertarians. Because, and I've heard this actually from a lot of people before, I sent out a request like, hey, what's the deal? Well, I feel like if I give this to my friend, then they're being indoctrinated and they don't want to listen to something called We Are Libertarians. So I felt that our content would be easier to share with people if it didn't have the name explicitly like leading the dance there. So that's a big reason. But, just kind of freedom from people's expectations of what they're to expect and, easier sharing, like those have definitely been big considerations. Another consideration was that, as I don't think there's any doubt that, like, if you listen to this show or follow me on social media, like, there's just a big disconnect between different factions in the libertarian movement at this point. And I'm not a populist, and I've never claimed to be a populist, and I never will be a populist. But I look back now and I go, I was kind of a populist libertarian. Like, let's rail against the elites. Let's rail against journalism. Let's rail against this, that. And 2020 has changed me in that it's made me a little bit more of a small C conservative, in that I realize we need private institutions. We need some elements of the society that we've built to have a functioning, free, stable society. And journalism in and of itself isn't bad. Individual reporters are bad. Experts aren't bad. Individual experts may be. The politicians acting on their stuff may be. Like, the more nuanced I become and try to parse out what is actually going on, the less I find myself appealing to a lot of libertarians, and I find them less appealing to me. But I've never been more ideologically convinced of libertarianism. Like, I think the backlash to lockdowns, the backlash to a lot of 2020, the BLM movement, for instance, I think has some very libertarian leanings within it, just like the anti-mask protests do. I think we've seen in 2020 that government doesn't work, but I don't know that we're always effectively making that case, because populism sells, like beating up on other people sells. That alt-right or alt-left mentality of making somebody else the enemy sells. And I've reflected a lot over the last year as to how I position myself and what I say on this show and what I believed, how that might contribute to movements that don't actually work. What for instance, like, we go, why is the libertarian very white and male? And then we never want to consider how our words affect other people. Why is it that people think that libertarians are tantruming babies? It's because we have this cognitive dissonance around things like COVID, and it just doesn't work. And I'm also really disturbed by the amount of people that just give Trump a pass. I wish all libertarians hated Trump as much as they hated Obama and Bush. Like, for me, I try to set benchmarks to make sure I'm not drifting along with the crowds, that I'm staying principled and true to consistent to what I believe and what I've always said. And, like, you should dislike Donald Trump as much, if not more than George W. Bush. Like, he's done some really terrible things, albeit not as terrible as killing 1 million Iraqis with the Iraqi war, but still not good and not worthy of support from libertarians. And so for all of these reasons, it just, I guess I've never felt more clear on what I believe and where I'm at and where my voice is, but I've never been more confused as to where I fit. Because the people that I'm like, when I read all these different blogs and listen to these different podcasts, the people I'm most identifying with now are like the Dispatch and the Bulwark guys, like Republicans. And I'm sure that will change. Foreign policy comes into focus. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of big disconnects and disagreements. But, Jonah Goldberg's writing a column this week that has using a Rush song in the title, quotes Murray Rothbard, quotes iPencil and Leonard Reed. And I'm like, what the hell's going on with these people? I look at Justin Amash and I go, I was so with that guy. He was the heir apparent to Ron Paul. And, he is a strong constitutional conservative, but he's likable and open and accessible and a classical liberal. And he just makes a lot of sense. Whereas a lot of other libertarian folks, I just don't, I'm having trouble with where I fit in what movement. And because it was just always very easy. Like, you just sort of say what everybody else is saying. You read everybody else's stuff and you just sort of repeat that. But as I've gotten more diligent about my reading, studying history, studying the philosophy for myself, I find myself somewhat discordant with a lot of peers. And that's not always been comfortable for our audience, but it has brought a tremendous amount of new audience. One of the things that I'm proud of is that women tend to feel safe in our group and connect better in our group than other libertarian groups, for instance. And that's not an attack on those folks. It's just an attitude that I try to cultivate because, I talk a lot about classical liberalism and unity and understanding, and I'm having a tough time not being bitter towards, the people that I've always sort of been bitter towards. I mean, if you're a longtime listener, like the first episode, we're talking about Ron Paul and cult of personalities and conspiracy theories and, that's always been there in the libertarian movement. Like, I came in when the 9/11 truther stuff was blossoming, and the Libertarian Party never let that person, that mentality kind of get to the top and represent what the Libertarian Party or movement meant. And as the GOP has encouraged that to the point that the Arizona GOP a couple days ago is tweeting out that Trump is the real president, and like they're just going full election truther. And I get that. Here's the hard part. Like, I get that conspiracy theorist and truther and all that stuff is pejorative and dismissive, but I don't know how to deal with people who can't connect with reality. Like, I don't know how to deal with cultists. And I don't know how to be respectful when, like, if my grandparents are getting the vaccine next week, and that's going to allow them to see each other for the first time. It's going to allow my 86-year-old grandfather to not be locked up in his post office box room, and he can have somewhat of a life at the end of his life, and I'm happy about that. And I think there's a certain segment of our movement that would never want him to have that opportunity. I'm skeptical about a vaccine that was created so quickly, but I also don't know much about vaccines, right? So, like, I'm sort of like, I don't know. I hear a lot of these stuff. The nurses passing out on TV. It's like, ugh. But I sure as hell don't want to rob my grandfather of that choice, right? So, I'm not anti-vax. Let's just do herd immunity, kill 1 million people because the vaccines are evil and Pfizer's going to get rich. Like, I don't understand those people. I don't get it. I don't get how you look at this election and think that it was stolen. And a lot of the people that cruelty was the point in the summer and denying COVID as a hoax in April, and now the election's stolen, and you're just like, I just can't. If the libertarian and conservative movements are going to be John Birch Society or Alex Jones, I'm just not interested in that. I don't want to tie myself to that. So I want to talk about what a great, I want to talk about free markets and innovation. We should be looking at this vaccine and go, the global cooperation and expertise that created a vaccine that is going to restore my grandfather's life it is a miracle. And that is solely due to, it's not solely, because the government ponied up a lot of money, many governments, but that expertise didn't come from government research. That came from private companies that will profit off of their hard work, but that's the foundation of it. The arguments about the masks and lockdowns, I'm totally with you on lockdowns, but if we're going to argue that you're a sheeple if you wear a mask, and I'm going to just not wear a mask, and if it's sort of like a pro-government argument in some ways, because if you're saying I'm going to do the wrong thing unless the government forces me to, and I'm mad about them forcing me to do it, but therefore I'm signaling to everybody else that the government is necessary to force me to be to do right action, right? There's wrong action, right action. So I just find a lot of these arguments muddled and weird and conspiratorial, and I don't know. I find my arguments to be discordant, and some of this really put a lot of pressure on people like Brian Nichols and Remzo, who are more right-leaning and are more willing to talk to those crowds. I should say I'm not unwilling to talk to those crowds. I went on Dave Smith and some of that stuff, but Brian's more right-leaning than I am, for instance. And when the name of your network is the same name as the podcast of a provocative show that is targeting some of your audience, that puts Brian in an uncomfortable position. Remzo worked at Parler. Some of this becomes uncomfortable for those guys. Well, changing the name of my show, because I'm not going to make it the Chris Spangle Podcast Network. I'll keep it We Are Libertarians. It takes some of that pressure off those guys. And, I'm totally fine with everything that they do, and I love Brian's hustle right now. Remzo and Brian are just pumping out content left and right that's really good. And as a partner with them in this network, I want to make sure that I'm giving them the best opportunity to succeed. But at the same time, I'm not going to change my message or shut up or not say what I think just because of, the whole point of doing this is to make people think. And sometimes that means being provocative towards people that need to be pushed out of their comfort zone. So that's a big reason for the name change, is just to kind of help those guys, because Brian and Remzo are just going to be huge podcasters. I mean, Remzo has this amazing career, as you heard in our interview, and Brian is really up and coming in the podcast space. And so, I just wanted to give some separation to those guys too. And there is some, changing the name of a show and the artwork and the branding is not necessarily smart when you've done it, when you've been investing for 8 years in that name and brand. But I'm confident that over time we evolve. If you're to say to most listeners, what do you think of Gina Martinez and Joe Ruiz? They wouldn't know who they are. I'm sure that at this point, Greg was on the first 250 episodes. There's probably a lot of people now who don't really know who Greg Lenz is. So audiences kind of change and evolve over time. And so, I can make this short-term pain point to ensure future growth for all these various reasons. Plus, it kind of helps when you're pitching interviews. I'd like to talk to more people and do more book interviews. And, it's a little hard when, again, you're looking if I were to write a conservative or liberal author, it's easier if you're doing it as the Brian Nichols Show than it is We Are Libertarians. So, So for all these reasons, I'm kind of probably rambling, but I just want to be very transparent about where I'm at and what I'm thinking with some of this stuff, because I really view our patrons as people who invest in the growth of this. And we've changed the name to WAL Plus. Again, I just felt it like, hey, join our Patreon sort of feels like begging, and it makes me uncomfortable. Whereas WAL Plus, like, again, this is kind of maybe it's a stupid decision, but people will invest in We Are Libertarians Patreon because we're creating new libertarians. But the psychology, we have a very, what was the word that Patreon, so Patreon has like a scale, and on one scale, it's like the audience is just like, yeah, I love those people. I don't want anything in return. I just want to support them. I want to, I get something of value. I want to give something back. Altruistic. So we have a very altruistic audience. We're the biggest libertarian Patreon. And, well, with the exception of the Fifth Column, those guys are making like $40,000 a month. So if you qualify them as a libertarian podcast, which I do, then they're the biggest. But, on the other side of the scale is a commoditized audience. And so calling it WAL Plus and saying you're going to get all these things and you give to get these features is kind of a risk, because then it commoditizes things. But I feel that it is, in the long term, probably going to be an easier sell to give features that, my problem is I was never consistent because I didn't take all this seriously. Because I had a day job. I still do. And I never thought I could actually be a full-time podcaster and political commentator. And in 2020, I have completely changed my psychology about that. So if you're relying on an altruistic audience because you're like, hey, if you like this show, donate. But we're not going to give you any content because we can't be consistent with creating it. That's a little bit different. But my psychology now is I've promised people things that I need to deliver. Because if I don't deliver, I'm not going to get a paycheck. And that is a shift in host-audience relationship, but it is also a boost in a host productivity. And I think you can tell there's just going to be a lot more bonus content. There's a lot more content coming out. I'm doing more writing. I'm getting ready to revamp the store. And it's because I want to, find some revenue streams to do this full time, and B, be a better servant of the audience. Like, you don't have an option. You have to have an episode on Saturday. There is no, I'll just blow it off this week anymore. Like, I want to be really consistent with that. I want to have the same consistent intro, the same, add some breaks in there, make it sound like a radio show instead of like, we're just winging it. There is some charm to our unprofessionalism, and that's not going to go away because I just make mistakes. I will always make mistakes. But there's also a little bit of like, if you're a new person to the show, you're just like, all right, this other podcast has like these same discipline for every show, same release schedule. Like, they're very professional, and then these guys are like not consistent, and it does, So I'm always looking to like be more professional in what I do, just because I just think it makes a better show for you. It's, and it just, like, if you have consistency in elements within the podcast, but also release schedule, it's easier for you to get to the information than if you can't count on us and it's sort of sloppy and like. So I'm working on being more disciplined with it. And a lot of that was that I always felt like We're Libertarians and my podcast was like the thing I could neglect. Because, all right, I've got college and I've got a full-time job and I do podcast consulting and I've got a girlfriend and like something's got to give somewhere, so I'm going to neglect that thing. And there's been somewhat of a psychology shift this year in that this is the thing I want to do and I've got to do it. And so Reagan, then the full-time job, then We Are Libertarians, and then everything else. I've got to move this way up my priority list if I want to do it full-time. So yeah, it's just, there's no reason that I can't be a full-time podcaster. You know, like the only thing stopping me is my own fear and low self-esteem. And I've just got to let that go, because there's people like you that listen and go, he doesn't think he's a full-time podcast. Like, I didn't realize he wasn't a full-time. Like, you know, you have a different perception of me than I might in my own head. And I have to integrate those two and stop being like if you give me a compliment, it makes me very uncomfortable, because I don't think I'm worth the compliment a lot of times. And so I've just got to stop that. So yeah, it's just about professionalizing and taking things more seriously. So, and that means giving you more content and making it more consistent and more reliable and higher quality. And just, you know, and having more fun with this, you know, where I think I'll be very candid with you. The old show, I was talking on Twitter with Joe Benitez, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name, but Joe was basically like, man, WAL 2014, 2013 to like 2017 was hilarious, and it was so much fun. Like all those pool parties and real friendship and really such a tight, strong group. And then we had a series of things that kind of broke the group down, like Greg left the show, Bittner moved, Jeff Vibert stopped doing his podcast. There were several divorces. And then all of a sudden it was just kind of like me and Harry, and I don't know what to do with this because the ensemble cast thing isn't working. And I got really into like researching and focusing that I kind of forgot how to have fun with the show. And 2020 was just very serious. And so I've got to find that gear of like having more fun with this. And not being so serious and tense, because I just can't do it full time. Like there's very serious issues and there's things that really concern me, but you know, I just can't. I got to have a little more fun and lighten up a little bit. I think Harry will tell you it's just like episodes now are like tight gripped and not as conversational as they should be. So these are the things that I've kind of been thinking about, just to be transparent with you. Because like I said, I consider you guys investors in this. I consider you partners in this. And I consider you a major... You are the reason that we have the ability to do anything. That, you know, Brian Nichols is going to be on the Matt Kibbe show. That is huge. That is so huge for Brian. Brian's numbers are doubling, tripling right now. Like, you know, that doesn't exist if we don't have the funding that our patrons give. You know, Rimzo is really diving into On the Run. You know, Trisha's coming back with Gingerarchy. The Boss Hog is just having one of their best years ever, too. That show is still so much fun and has so much of, like, the old show of the gang hanging out, chit-chatting, the various shows that I do, like in the educational stuff, like with Liberty Explained, like all that comes from you. Because this network is so big and broad that I can no longer fund it. And I just wouldn't be able to. Like, I make a couple $100 a month for my time off of this, but I pay for those guys just to do content out of your Patreon money. So, all the evolutions and the additions and all that stuff is just due to your generosity. And I can't thank you enough. And thank you for giving us one of our best years ever. And we grew from $1,300 a month at the beginning of the year to a little over $2,000 in 2020. And that just gave us the ability to do things like Liberty Explained and do so much more. And, if we can get to a point where I'm doing this full time and I am focusing solely on political commentary at chrisspangle.com and on the Chris Spangle Show, all that energy that I put into my day job and the Pat Down and podcast consulting and all these and college and all these things that I put energy into to try and get to the point of doing this full time, making money, saving money. Imagine all that energy just into this alone. I really, my plan is within a couple years to be there and to produce content that is rivaling Dan Carlin and Joe Rogan. That is my goal, because I have every belief that with my full attention, libertarianism can become mainstream because I am just laser focused on it. So with all that energy. So I know that probably sounds, see, this is the, what goes on in every creator's head. You say, all right, I have this big goal, this big dream. And then you say it out loud. And then your voice in the back of your head goes, you egotistical piece of shit. So, but yeah, I mean, that's really where, like, I love history and I love libertarianism, and I just want to do this for the rest of my life, and that is only possible because of you guys, and I thank you so much for it. It just, like, it means the world to me. It means the world to our other hosts. It means the world to the social group that forms around this, the 100 people that are kind of in We Are Libertarians, producing content, doing stuff, becoming friends with each other. You know, it's great, and I hope you consider yourself a part of that. So you at the $25 and $100 level are like the linchpin. We lose you guys, and we shut it down, you know? So thank you so much, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate your support. And if you have any questions, comments, whatever, please hit me up. I'd love to talk to you. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you next month on Build the Wall.